Hey everyone, super excited to be talking about how to ignite a regenerative revolution. My name is Evan Ross, and I'm in the midst of a big transition in my life. 2 years ago, I quit my high paying tech life, sold all my belongings, moved to South America, started offering my strategic narrative consulting to regenerative leaders under gift economy, that means no expectation of payment, all the while trying to align every fiber of my being behind unconditional love. It's been a really wild ride where I've met some truly inspiring people, but today I'm going to tell you a different story. I'm going to tell you a story of systemic change, a story of cultural regeneration, a story of the power that lives in every single one of us to face the great crisis of our time. A story that starts with a writer. Because Leo Tolstoy was afraid he'd kill himself. The famous and successful Russian novelist was in a spiritual crisis that got so bad that he wouldn't let himself be left alone with rope for fear he'd hang himself. One day, after years of soul searching, he wanders off into the woods. He's sitting alone when suddenly from the rustling leaves and birdsong emerges a spiritual awakening. He realizes that God is life, God is love, and that the kingdom of God is in, through, and all around everything. From that moment, he's transformed. He goes on to write his least known, most powerful work, which then inspires Mahatma Gandhi, who then inspires Martin Luther King. And so here we had a human who had a spiritual insight, who then told stories that inspired other humans with spiritual insights to themselves tell stories that changed the course of history. I call these humans story seers. And story seers are exactly what we need given what we're facing today. Now, I'm not going to spend much time talking about the meta crisis because you folks already know that 10,000 years ago we left our indigenous worldview behind and separated ourselves from nature in order to form empires competing to extract and dominate, which has driven exponential growth and shot us past planetary boundaries. The thing I will say about this meta crisis is that I think of it as a crisis of coherence. Because before we started farming and forming civilization, we thought of ourselves not as separate individuals dominating nature, but instead as interconnected parts in service to the greater whole. Because we knew that what was healthy for the whole was healthy for us. Which is the essence behind the African idea of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Which is similar to what drove tribes across the world to actively steward their ecosystems. This is coherence, where humans, along with all other beings, are aligned with the good of Mother Earth, the whole system. Just like how the 36 trillion cells of your body relate with coherence to form you. Or how the 3 million species of the Amazon each do their part in coherent relation, which allows 390 billion trees to transpire 20 trillion liters of water vapor every day. What we're looking at here is a map of how deforestation across the world affects precipitation patterns all around the world. And as you can see, that cutting down the Amazon would reduce, according to this model, the Sierra Nevada snowpack in my native California by 50%, which means no more avocados for us. So that's kind of a big deal. So anyways, this water transpires from all of these trees and precipitates all over the world, which waters agriculture, which feeds the 36 trillion cells of your body, which allows you to regenerate your local bioregion, which ultimately serves the radically interconnected whole, which in turn serves us. That's coherence. Every stakeholder in a system united in service to the whole, because the whole serves them. When the cells of our body don't do this, we call it cancer. It grows exponentially, unsustainably, until it kills its host. When we humans don't do this, we grow exponentially, unsustainably, until we tip the biosphere towards collapse. That's incoherence. And just like cancer, it will kill its host, and itself in the process. Which is why we in this bioregional, regenerative, meta-modern, whatever you might call it, movement must bring our local systems into coherence. And I believe the most powerful way we can do that is through story. Because we've seen throughout history that story is how visionary leaders ignited coherent movements in business, in politics, and in social justice. But I do not believe that real regenerative system change comes from the act of telling stories. Instead, I believe it comes from giving ourselves permission to be story seers. Because every single one of us has the power to change the world, just like Tolstoy, just like Gandhi, just like all the other good hearts that did what was uniquely theirs to do. And doing that means that we must learn to immerse ourselves in the vast complexity of our world in order to study it, sit with it, and sense into it until we see the coherence. And then we must embody that coherence by aligning our heads, our hearts, and our guts behind one coherent strategic narrative before then letting it flow through our words and actions. Then we nurture the story as it myceliates out into the world to sprout new storytellers who each sprout new storytellers who form networks within networks of people who believe what you believe. This is what Gandhi was talking about when he said, be the change. Or today we might say, be the coherence. Because when a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. And we know that transformative change can happen very fast, especially with today's digital technology. Which is why I believe that if each of us does this story seer thing networked together, we can tip humanity towards that more beautiful story our hearts know is possible. This to me is the essence of the regenerative story. Transform yourself inside, network in community, change the world by doing what is uniquely yours to do. And when we do these together, our movement becomes a powerful, coherent, cultural force to be reckoned with. This, of course, isn't going to be easy because standing in the way is the most monumental challenge we as a species have ever faced. The omnicidal system running our civilization, which emerges from all our internalized narratives and beliefs, doesn't care about regeneration. It is ingrained deep in virtually every human on the planet, including those of us in this movement, which is a big part of why we have been so fragmented and in many ways lacking coherence, which is a problem that further exacerbates the dreadful lack of financial, energetic, and human resources going towards regenerative work. We cannot make real impact without solving these problems. And if we cannot make real impact at scale and prove to people that another way is possible, then fear will be the only force driving them as things start to unravel. And so if we wish to spark a radical cultural enlightenment, then we story seers must elevate our game. We must become masters of articulating our visions, building alignment, attracting resources, inspiring action, and ultimately leading movements, just like all the great story seers that came before us. What I'd like to share you now is my vision for how we all might do that. I've spent my entire life fascinated with story. I've spent the majority of my career pursuing mastery in something called strategic narrative, which you can think of like your version of MLK's I Have a Dream. And after my own spiritual awakening, my vision is that it and other regenerative techniques empower every aspiring story seer to inspire radical, strategically coherent behavior change towards a more beautiful future. Towards this, let's take a look at the ecosystem for regenerative business. Because the answer to the crisis is not one heroic messiah coming to save us, but is instead millions of messiahs united as one coherent whole. And this we can manifest by coming together as a coherent ecosystem of regenerators, whether we're healers, technologists, indigenous wisdom keepers, or whatever our gift, to empower each other and everyone else on their journeys of transformation. Now, I'm not going to pretend I know even 5% of what this would take. This will require massive collaboration, massive coherence. But to my thinking, we need to create conditions such that all the conditioning, all the trauma, all the toxic narratives we have been fed can be healed with more speed, more intention, more effectiveness, both for those of us already living the new story and for those who would be if only they were freed to do so. This will bring increasingly critical masses of people into coherence, but by itself won't be enough. In order to create massive systemic change, we need to go beyond mere coherence to achieve what I'm calling hypercoherence. This is riffing off Daniel Schmachtenberger's idea of hyper-agents, but the idea is to make regenerators not only coherent, but also hyper-effective in whatever their context. This would require skill development, technology, communities of practice, and many other things that can empower all of us to transform systems. This, I hope, to be a big step towards a hyper-coherent ecosystem of regenerative businesses. That last word is key because the movement must be funded. Like I said, there's a dreadful lack of financial resources going to regeneration. And the reason why is this guy. His name is Moloch, and he is the system. He's a Canaanite god from the Bible who they used to throw their babies into the fire in order to gain some sort of short-term benefit like winning a war or becoming rich, and was used as a metaphor to describe the collective consciousness of global capitalism by Allen Ginsberg, and then later in an article by Scott Alexander called Meditations on Moloch. Highly recommend reading. In any case, Moloch is the collective intelligence that both emerges from and reinforces incoherent stories that say we are all separate from one another in nature, and that dog-eat-dog competition is the way of the world, and that the only way to survive is to win, and that our survival must take precedence over all else because we are just meaningless molecules in a meaningless universe. Moloch is extraction. Moloch is domination. And Moloch is endless exponential growth crossing planetary boundaries. Moloch also controls the money, which is a problem because he hates paying for anything that doesn't give him growth. The way he sees it, he needs growth because if he doesn't get it faster than his competitors, he loses. And in the game Moloch's playing, you either win or you die. Just because I couldn't resist making a Game of Thrones reference. And so if we are going to get the funding we need for regeneration, then we gotta somehow convince Moloch that regeneration will help him win. We must tell him a story wherein our thinking, our practices, our way of relating, our regenerative ideology are competitive advantages, which means to my thinking that we must sell him medicine. Because Moloch is sick. And when you're sick, it's really hard to make money. We can just look at corporate America as a good example. You got culture wars like we saw with Disney. You have mental health issues among employees. And you have exponentiating complexity that's near impossible for corporate leaders to navigate. We're only scratching the surface, the tip of the iceberg here. These and other meta-crisis issues cut into Moloch's profits, which makes him weaker. And if competitors find a way to stay just a little healthier than him, then he's in for a bad time, which is especially true as we push closer towards collapse. And so if Moloch believes our medicine will make him better, then he will be very motivated to buy it. And so the question becomes, how might we, hyper-coherent regenerators, convince Moloch that our medicine is what he needs? Because if we can do that, not only does this pump the regenerative ecosystem full of money, which allows us to make bigger impact, which inspires increasingly more people to join the movement, which then allows us to make bigger impact, and so on and so forth, but it also heals Moloch. Because deep down inside, Moloch is just a scared little child feeling abandoned and alone. That's to say that Moloch is just a trauma response. This is not a good versus evil story. This is a story of healing. In the world we're building, no child need ever feel abandoned and alone again. And so let's build that ecosystem. Let's become hyper-coherent. And let's collaborate like never before to field solutions to Moloch's problems, because trust me, he's got a lot more than 99 of them, and he'd really like them to go away. Which is a motivator I've seen in my work with strategic narrative, which has not only empowered my regenerative clients to win funding from the United Nations Development Program, or to sell indigenous-sanctioned biodiversity credits into the enterprise, but has also transformed private businesses too. And there are a lot of good-hearted business leaders out there who believe in a better world and just need a coherent story to lead them to it. And so join me in creating it. Because alone, I cannot do it. This needs to be a collective action. But together, we story seers can change the course of history. So let's give ourselves permission to be who we already are, so we can empower the emergence of a just, loving humanity, fully coherent with our Mother Earth. Thank you.